have, and I think today is very interesting. We have the MD and CEO of ICICI Securities and a very good friend, Mr. Vijay Chandok. Vijay, welcome to this talk, and looking forward to next 1 hour discussing many issues.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev, for having me on your chat show.
Yeah.
We've had several chats, but I'm sure this chat is going to be different.
That's right. So we've just for your information, we've done actually 42 such chats. This year the 43rd, and pretty interesting, wide range. But in terms of financial services, haven't done many. So this is quite nice. Yeah. So Vijay, you've been with ICICI for what, more than 26 years. You're a career ICICI group person, right? And you moved to securities slightly more than 2.5 years ago, right? So being from a bank to a securities business, how was that move? And maybe you can talk about it. You're not a markets person, but you moved somewhere here. So what was the experience like?
So you started by describing it quite aptly, is what I should say. I've been an ICICI person. Yes, it's been more than 26. It's actually now almost close to 30 years. It's 28, 29 years now with the group. Yes, when I signed up with ICICI, I signed up with ICICI, the brand, the financial services, and I've seen that over the 30 years, close to 30 years that I've been with the group, what it was is today, it is truly being transformed. There never used to be a back then. So it has moved from being a DFI, a developmental financial institution, to setting up a bank and then a reverse merger in between. Close to 26 out of the 28 years. In the bank itself, I've had several roles. ICICI, the way we look at ourselves is as a finance professional, as a leader, are rotated into different roles, different functions. So during the bank stint, I was provided with business segments which were requiring turnaround. I was provided with business segments that required to be scaled up. Through ROE. So I've handled different types of responsibilities back then. 2.5 years back, there is this requirement that he has. He's very keen that senior and someone who's handled a width of experience goes and takes over ICICI Securities. If you alluding to the fact that we've got to get this experience positive to the investors. So that was an opportunity to run a listed company of the group enormously, is what I should say. And I must say that as a head of a company, independent listed company, you will be given full independence. I will not even be on the board of the company. It would be an independent chair who would be running the board. And, ICICI as a principal shareholder would, of course, have representation in form of directors, nominee directors, but otherwise you are totally independent. Do what is right for your company, do what is right for your employees, do what is right for your regulators, your shareholders, and all other stakeholders. That is what I would expect you to do as head of a company. So I was super excited, getting an opportunity to run an independent listed company of ICICI Group. And it took me less than a minute to actually say that, when do you want me to move? So that is how the journey started.
That's great. So in fact, that brings me to the question that I was going to ask you later. But as a bank, then how does the bank look at ICICI Securities? Of course, Sandeep would able to answer this question better, but since you have had so many dialogues with him, what do they see you as? What is your, where does the symbiotic relationship come in?
So you're very right to say that the right person to answer would be Sandeep. But having been a person in the group, let me explain how I'm experiencing ICICI treating us, and also in meetings when we have conversations, how they sort of articulate what they expect out of us. Foremost, amongst the subsidiaries, I've often heard the senior leadership team at ICICI Bank clearly say that ISEC is one of the most strategically important subsidiary. The reason is very simple. The reason is that we have a very interesting partnership. This partnership is reflected through a product called the 3-in-1 account. What it fundamentally represents is a combination of a savings account at ICICI Bank combined with a broking account at ICICI Securities. And all of them are so seamlessly integrated onto our platform called ICICIdirect.com that as far as the customer is concerned, he sees single experience. It's a single digital experience. And as a result of this kind of a partnership that ICICI and ICICI Securities, ICICI Bank and ICICI Securities has put together, ICICI Bank is a beneficiary of two outcomes. Outcome number one is increased float, because it's very, very clear that whenever you have a customer who is an engaged customer, and our proposition of broking is indeed a very engaging proposition, it leads to increase in float as a consequence in the saving balances. And that empirically we have seen, 6 months after an account gets active, moves to 2.5 times typically before the account gets the attachment of a broking relationship. So there's a kicker in float, and that's very important from ICICI's point of view. So that's one clear advantage that they see. And second, obviously, is an engaged customer is a loyal and a happy customer. So you increase your loyalty factor, you increase your chances of cross-selling banking products and so on and so forth. So from a banking point of view, it's very strategic, very important. The size of the float that they enjoy through banking attachments is a very sizable number. Therefore, from that perspective, low-cost deposit source, sticky deposits, I'm talking about CASA deposits, I think ICICI Bank provides. For us, it is extremely symbiotic and very critical, because it's a very, I would say, compelling way in which we are able to get customers to increase our size of the company. The customers that we acquire from ICICI Banks is completely of a different quality, and it would be not out of place actually to mention that if I were to measure size and quality of ICICI Securities in terms of this parameter, which is the AUM which the customers have provided ICICI Securities with, I would believe, be the largest equity player in the market in India today. And for the record, this number, the latest number that we reported was 5.1 lakh crore. So we are talking of about 5.1 trillion rupees of deposits, not deposits, AUM sitting in this relationship on ICICI Direct platform. So clearly we get high quality and involved customers on the one side, which helps us improve our own presence and stature. And on the other side, bank gets very, I would say, sticky as well as a high CASA customer with an ability to cross-sell. So from that point of view, there is actually absolute business sense for ICICI to, ICICI Bank to look at ICICI Securities as a very strategic sort of a partner. And it is not surprising, therefore, they hold about 75% equity stake, which is the maximum regulatorily possible stake that they can keep for a listed entity as per the SEBI guidelines, as you're aware. So I think in behavior and in terms of articulation, the importance of ICICI Securities to ICICI Bank's scheme of things is very, very apparent.
Sure. So that's good one side, but let's talk from your side. The fact that you are bank-based, bank-backed financial services company, that I can understand some of the positives, as you said, from getting clients and all. But there are some negatives potentially I can think of, and maybe you can correct me on that. So let's say someone like a Zerodha is one person run company or whatever, few people run company, lean. That's one part. Second, they don't have to worry about the compliances of a bank, being a bank, backed business. Do you think all those are also negatives from your perspective, or how do you see that? Or even third part is even the legacy system, or from an IT perspective.
Yeah, so you've raised, I think, several issues. So let me go layer by layer to address these issues. I think every entity has brings with it its sense of its complement of strengths and disadvantages on the table. If I were to look at, since you mentioned, example of Zerodha, I think Zerodha enjoys the fact that it is in the more in a startup mode, more nimble. You alluded to the fact that there is regulatory arbitrage, but I would hasten to add that given the way the regulators look at entities and companies, there is absolutely no regulatory arbitrage. A regulated entity, which is a company like ICICI Securities or Zerodha, there is any difference between the two in terms of regulation. So regulatory arbitrage is probably not something that one should even think of as an item of differentiation. Advantages of not having a legacy, certainly. Advantages of not having any kind of a starting position to take and disrupt the market, I think certainly. I think these are the two key advantages a startup type of a company enjoys. So coming back to a construct of an ICICI Bank, I think ICICI Bank, apart from the customer franchise that I described, also enjoys the comfort of dealing with a brand, a bank-backed brand, which has its own, I would say, significance in a business like ours, which is business of money, business of trust, where you're really entrusting customers are entrusting their money with you to deal in the markets. So I think that's a great, I would say, great tacit strength that ICICI brand gives our company, apart from, of course, the customer base. In terms of technology, which is what you have said, I think it is nothing to do with the fact that you come from a certain parentage. The fact that you've been around longer than the others gives you a technology sort of a baggage to deal with. So our technology position today has the 20-year plus kind of a presence in the market. So we've carried that technology capability. But I think ICICI, if you would know from a DNA perspective, has got two characteristics which I specifically want to highlight. I think one is what I call the characteristic of continuously reinventing itself and destroying itself. While I often say this, and I'll say this, that we may be a 25 or thereabouts year old company, but we are a 5-year young enterprise. And I truly mean what I'm saying. What it means is that in the last 25 years, we would have probably recreated ourselves 5 times to become what we are. Otherwise, it's in a tech kind of a space, to continue to remain an important, relevant player, even after 25 years, quarter of a century, is not easy unless you are continuously reinventing yourself on an ongoing basis. And we've been doing that every few years, every 5 years or thereabouts, we've been reinventing ourselves. So that mindset, that DNA that we have inherited from our parent, keeps us young, keeps us agile, keeps us nimble. And I do believe that we are a pretty nimble organization. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to bring about transformation that we've been able to bring about over the years. The second element is that ICICI as a brand, as a company, as a group, right from the 90s, has been investing heavily on technology, right? So technology is not new to us from that sense. Right from the 90s, if you recollect, late 90s, we were the first entity to have brought the ATMs. Back then, it's probably not even considered to be a technology item today, but back then it was an item of innovation and technology. Imagine getting money 24 hours, 24 into 7. It was unimaginable in those days. But that's just an example. I think the point is that technology has been a part of our growing up DNA, and therefore technology is not new to us. So we've also been investing heavily in technology. But what is different and unique is the fact that I would say evolution in technology has taken place. And the place where I feel that we have had to do and we still have to do a lot of catching up to do is the customer facing piece of technology. A lot of I would say coolness quotient, experience quotient has been constructed on the technology side of it, which is the experience layer for customers, making it very, very convenient. I think the older players like us, we have invested heavily in technology. I think we are very strong when it comes to items like security, reliability, scalability, salience, response time, which are very important for our businesses. We are very strong there. I think in terms of hardware, in terms of architecture that we have created, right up there. But when it comes to the experience layer, which is the layer which touches the customer, I think that is where we have sort of lagged as a company. And that is an item of transformation for us. So I would say that the disadvantage for us, if at all, if I were to bring about, are in factors like this. I think on an overall basis, looking at the strength that the brand has given, the power of trust that that brand has been able to enable us to offer to the customer, is something which I would think far outweighs whatever I would say minus items have come along by the fact that we've been a legacy player in the business on a balance.
That's great. So, Vijay, I guess you've touched upon these points now in terms of, and I must compliment first on both your annual reports, on your presentation, and I think there's a lot of information there for anybody to kind of see where the strategies, and a lot of these questions actually you've answered also there. But I'm just trying to get a bit more deeper into those. So you call yourself a fintech company, right? And if you see Angel, for example, they have now hired a CEO who's from Silicon Valley, and so clearly, I think there is a change in the way. And I saw one of your interviews where you said we are not a traditional company. We are actually one of the new age companies, right? So, I think so. Let's just talk a bit about that. And you've come from a part of the bank which was not necessarily that technologically dependent in at least some parts of your business on the international, right? And you've come here and changed the game quite a bit. So let's talk about this whole journey in terms of what have you done? How are you taking this business from a technology point? And when you call yourself fintech, what does it actually mean?
Yeah. So I would say one of the things that my 25, 27 years of experience at the bank has done, it has taught me how to think, how to lead, how to sort of deal with complex situations, difficult situations when you're pushed to the corner. I think that's the overarching theme that one has been exposed to. So I think that element of seasoning that experience has given you, I think I personally found it very, very valuable in enabling me as a person to deal with situations that one has to deal with. So in such a context, I would say that when when we move to an entity, ICICI Securities, I found that there are enormous elements of strengths which this company has got already in terms of its technology that one has invested in customer franchise that has proven to be very, very sticky over the years. And at the same time, we realized that there is a huge underpenetrated opportunity of growth, which is waiting for us to happen, for us to harness, and keeping that sort of opportunity at the back of the head, one went about transforming, I would say, looking at what we have on the table as strength, borrowing on the experience of the past, and identifying the gaps that existed, I would say, both in terms of skills, people, and the investment that one had to do in technology, identifying them, and then systematically going about making a clear program. I think one of the most important elements of bringing about changes in ICICI Securities has been dealing with people. You're dealing with a band of very successful professionals who have deep market expertise. And I come from a place which, as you pointed out, without any prior exposure to markets. And I clearly recognize and realize the value of these people who understand markets so well. But to deal with a bunch of highly successful markets people who are now confronted with a situation of disruption in the market was not easy. And probably because I was not a markets person, I was able to see this disruption as a bystander, as a person with. I didn't see myself as someone who has to sort of fight this disruption to deal with it. On the other hand, I thought that this disruption was providing an opportunity for me to flow with that stuff, and therefore I think my role was really to play more some of the softer parts. We had to get this set of professionals to see the disruption. I think dealing with them I have to do it in a very, I have to do it, not just had to, but I have to do it in a very sensitive way, because it's not about, giving them the comfort that what we are doing is not something that is lessening the value of what they have done in the past. What they have done in the past was very relevant in the context in which they did. If what is getting demanded of them today is different from what is being done by them in the past, is in no way a disendorsement of what they've done in the past. It is just that a comfort that actually you're doing this because that's what is required to be done in the emerging, today and tomorrow. I think that comfort was very much required. In places, one had to infuse skill. So we had to hire, we have to hire talent. We've been hiring talent from outside. In places, you also had to rearrange the organization, including, some of the people who have just not been able to shape up. They've been identified for, certain specific roles which are relevant for, their skills. So we had to do these kinds of rearrangements, infuse skill, give comfort where it is required. You had to play the taskmaster where it is required. And to my mind, this is an ongoing journey. But the idea was to, clearly, it's not business as usual for us. So we had to, recognize that first and then drive that agenda of change. So to my mind, to your point on not coming from a markets background, in a way, I think helped me actually recognize the fact that there's a disruption going on and I don't have to fight it. I have to actually flow with that disruption on the other side.
Right. So, creating a tech organization, and one of the challenges right now we keep hearing also is people. Even technology companies are finding it difficult to hire people. Traditional companies are losing tech people to technology companies and so on, and so many startups. What has been your experience, and are you able to find people?
So fortunately, ICICI has been a brand which has been able to attract talent for several years. I think that's clearly an advantage. But that said, you're very right. You know, the last, I would say, particularly 3 quarters, ever since this world has kind of re-emerging from the pandemic lockdown kind of a situation, uh, there has been such a large transformation towards digitization as a theme across industries, such a large transformation in customer behavior across various propositions, that virtually every company is talking digitalization as an important component of their current and future strategy. So obviously there is a great demand for such professionals. We also, it's not just about tech people. I would add that even analytics people, digital marketing people who are not entirely, tech guys, but they are not entirely marketing guys either. All these, I would say, category of people are becoming in great demand and finding at least 2 or 3 jobs given at any point in time. So yes, the last 5 months, 4 or 5 months, particularly, we've seen this kind of a behavior from this segment of the market. I would say salaries have gone up. Perhaps for this segment, in a short period of time, the salaries have gone up by as much as maybe 35–40%. I'm talking on an average. Some would have probably doubled, but those are exceptions. But on an average, maybe 30% or so is something which the last 4–5 months have seen. So yes, how do you deal with this situation? To try and retain the existing staff, we in a way, fortunately started this concept of giving employee stock options about 2 years back to our staff. To some extent, that sort of helps like a hook. There is an element of belonging. It's not just pure money. It's also the fact that there is value creation, wealth creation opportunity that has been signaled to a bunch of people. So it's not just about this one time, but a series of ESOP that can flow depending on his performance. And people have seen how much wealth creation can happen through that. I think people recognize it. So that was one that we did to some extent, reducing, stymieing the flow. On the other side, we've had to also, obviously change our proposition to ensure that we remain relevant in the market. We are never, I would say, attracting people on packages. That's not the way in which we have attracted people, but we are fairly competitive. So we've got to remain in a certain target quartile in the market. So we, as a part of, that's part of our policy. So we align ourselves to deal with these issues. So I suppose it's a combination of brand, it's a combination of incentives in form of ESOPs, and some element of realignment that, that is currently being used as our approach to retain as well as attract talent that we need for our growth.
Sure. So before I come to the main discussion on disruption part of it, one last point. We as an outsider are trying to judge which company is more tech ready, which is less tech ready, something like that. And, very difficult for us other than just hearing the commentary that the company says. Is there a framework that we should be looking at in terms of how to kind of judge who is more, who's better, ready for this whole technology revolution or digitalization that's happening?
So let me try to answer this question the way I think about it. Okay. So the way one would think about it is for you to be a technology ready company at a high level, you need two, I would say, components. One is the enablement components. I would put enable components as skill, people skill. I would put money as resources as a second important component. And then there is a second element, which is in terms of how is the company placed in terms of their agility to adapt, right? The agility is not just a mindset capability, and agility from a strategy point of view, that's very important, but agility also from a, I would say, technology stack and technology architecture point of view. So, I think I asked myself this question: how agile is our company? And therefore, from a technology viewpoint, and therefore, in my mind, I've divided this whole technology piece into 3 layers, at least in our industry. Okay, layer 1 is the layer which actually touches the customer. That's the layer which I call the experience layer. Now, most people, including analysts, including customers, experience it, feel it. That's their moment of truth as far as assessing a company's technology prowess is concerned. What they experience is effectively the UI UX of the company, so to speak, very crudely put. If they find that the UI UX is good, they believe that this is the best technology company in the universe. That's the way the mind works. But I would urge all of you to go below the surface, open the hood, and look at 2 more layers. So there is that experience layer, which I think is very important, but that is not the entire definition of a technology ready company. The second piece is what I call the middle layer, or the brain. This is the place which manages the risk management systems. This is the place which receives data, processes data, and makes data do the things it is expected to do in an intelligent fashion, and deliver an output to the customer through a very nice UI UX. Right? So that's it's responsible for security. It's responsible for I mentioned risk management. It is responsible for uptime. It is responsible for handling scale. It is responsible for, that's where the what one calls salience. How fast things are moving from a decision making to a actioned decision output. All of that happens here, the brain. And then you have the third layer, which is below the surface, which is what I call the layer which is typically connecting you to regulators, reporting systems, the MIS, data lakes, which feeds analytical capabilities into the company. So that entire piece, process data, which is collected, and then you create management information systems, performance management systems, reporting that needs to be done to the regulators, the entire analytics that can be done, how that data can be used for the marketing, and so on and so forth. So I think of it in 3 layers, right? So I would urge you to also, assess companies on how good they are on each of these 3 layers, and then figure out their, I would say, readiness. What is also important to recognize is that literally, again, I'll try to oversimplify it for explaining myself. The experience layer should be seen like a Velcro. You don't like this experience, just scrap it, put a new Velcro, and it's fresh and renewed. Because there is no end to what you can keep doing to an experience layer. So the question to ask is your architecture literally Velcroable? Because today's UI UX, which looks very good, is not going to be a great UI UX after 6 months. You'll probably need something else. Some new feature is going to come. Some new agility elements are going to come in. Some new twists will come into your journeys, which is required. You have that capability of just literally scraping it out and putting a new Velcro tape on top. So we need to have a company which is capable of having that kind of a flexibility, which is almost like molting the skin of the experience out and replacing it with a fresh experience layer. I would say many companies would meet the cut on the first layer, the top layer. Many so-called technology savvy companies would fail very badly in the second layer, and they are quite decent in the third layer, right?
Right.
So that's how I look at it.
Sure.
I think if I were to look at my own company, I think we are very strong in the second layer. We required a lot of improvement in the top layer, and we are still WIP company on that front. On the bottom layer, we were not bad, but we were definitely not cutting edge. We've had to make investments in improving the bottom layer. But what is most important is we have created what one calls API connections, which enables us to literally velcro the top layer out. So 500 odd APIs we have created, which gives us the capability of velcroing out literally the experience layer and replacing it from time to time in a quick manner.
Right. But there's also a trade-off between UI UX versus, let's say, data security, for example, right? So, in terms of speed at least, or whatever. So how do you manage that?
No. I won't completely agree with what you have said. You could say that there could be a trade-off between data security and experience, right? Because probably for data security, you would ask some extra controls. You would set some extra controls to, maybe a two-factor authentication, maybe, taking him through an extra journey of onboarding to do a double verification somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So you could distort the experience. But to say that a good UI UX is equal to weak security may not be an absolutely right, accurate statement.
What I meant was experience, the
Yeah,
experience part.
speed need not get compromised because of security factors.
Right.
Experience to some extent could get compromised. Okay, indirectly speed, because you have to probably go through one extra journey or whatever to meet that security feature. Yes, that to that extent, I think it's a fair statement. Having said that, I think it's important to keep looking at what can you do to make your security factors as non-intrusive as possible, to not come in the way of customer experience and yet maintain high levels of security and customer confidentiality. I think that's an area which is an ongoing challenge for all business leaders and all companies which are in the space.
Right. Sure. So let's come to disruption part, right? And I think the main thing that I wanted to understand, and let's just forget for a minute ICICI Securities. Let's talk about the legacy system versus the fintechs in a way that's happening. And there are many profit pools that are going to get disrupted. They're already getting disrupted, and so on. Where do so what do you think are the main areas where profit pools can get disrupted? And then we'll come to ICICI Security. How are you kind of playing that game? But it'll be interesting to hear because you've been on the bank side as well. So, you would know that far better than many people.
So let me, let me try and answer the question from probably our industry, in terms of people who are in the securities business and equities business. What are the disruptions of profit pools that are taking place? I think if I were to look at equities business, first and foremost, disruption has already happened in the broking revenues, right? So that's clearly a profit pool or a revenue pool which is getting disrupted. This disruption did not start now. It is probably spoken about a lot more in popular media now, but the disruption actually started 6 years back. So it's been going on for the last 6 years, I think from 2015-16 is when this whole story started. When it comes to another important element of, I would say, mutual funds, the disruption is again taking place on the mutual fund revenue because of the growth of the direct plans, right? So that's the other space which is happening. At this point in time, these are the two main, I would say, revenue pools that are getting disrupted. I would believe that going forward, just like I think in the more medium term, just like probably payments has become not a revenue giving kind of a proposition, it would not be, I would say, completely out of the whack to believe that broking, could get kind of disrupted on an ongoing basis. Although for the last, I would say, couple of years, there has been some element of stability on further disruption of revenue pools in the industry. I would believe that these are the two main elements that are getting disrupted in the space.
But even you as a fintech, and let's for a minute think of you as a fintech versus ICICI Bank, let's say as a a bank, a traditional bank, you are also able to take away some of the profit pools of ICICI Bank in a way, and let's in a very simplistic way, right? Because let's say a distribution revenue, or even selling, you are starting to sell many more things which a bank would do, but because you are digital, you're doing it. But I'm saying that you are a fintech who's doing that, right? So isn't that also something that maybe you are actually disrupting in a positive way, but you're hitting the bank in a way?
So if you ask me, when it comes to comparing a fintech with a banking sort of a context, I'm yet to see a kind of a competitive disruption taking place at scale, right? Yet to see. And I'll come to this point in a minute. What is the disruption we are seeing? Actually, we are seeing more constructive disruption. It is a disruption where a bank does a bunch of things, historically probably not too well, or some components of that bunch of things not too well. There is a fintech which does a bunch of the things that the bank does not do too well, very well. And there is that one element which the bank does very well, which a fintech is not able to do. And it is therefore a constructive marriage between a fintech and a bank. That's the model that probably one has started seeing, and it looks that we could see some meaningful scale getting created out of that. The piece that the bank does well and a fintech is yet to demonstrate their capability of doing well, I think, is credit risk. That is a game which a bank has sort of learned over, I would say, decades of going through cycles of dealing with different scenarios, situations, etc. And fintechs are trying to translate that into some algos, into some 700 factor models, and so on and so forth, which nobody has sort of seen getting proven over test of time. So really, I would say that if that indeed plays out for fintechs, then true disruption of a competitive sense at scale probably would appear for the banking industry. Otherwise, I would say that most of the fintech kind of disruption would be complementary and constructive partnership kind of a disruption that is taking place. In a way, one would look at it, I think, is that it is not really disrupting and eating into a banking kind of a profit pool. On the other hand, it is bringing growth in the industry and adding new, I would say, unaccessed customer pools into the sort of revenue fold. The disruption in profit pool will probably appear in the short term because there is a competitive downward pressure on yields when you start off. But when you're over that hill and the yield story is sort of stabilized, probably the way the broking seems to have stabilized for the last 2 years, with more and more people coming into the fold, into the industry at a much lower price point, you will see an expansion in industry, and that seemingly low, destructive disruption, even in this sort of an example, starts becoming a collaborative, growth over a period of time. But a true disruption of a banking sort of a piece will happen if indeed a fintech is able to manage to handle credit risk, over a cycle well, and not just that, I would say be able to attract capital of that magnitude on an ongoing basis, That's the second piece that they will have to sort of demonstrate and prove. And the third piece that they will have to demonstrate and prove is that they'll have to really do all of this under the ambit of the regulatory regime, right? Which they are probably not used to.
Right. No, fair point. So basically, you are saying that it's like a bit like the NBFC revolution that happened, which brought in last mile, and NBFC banks would give money to NBFCs who would then on-lend to the last mile. So you are seeing right now fintech as something like that.
Yeah, in some sense, it is in that mold. You're right, because NBFCs, when they came, they expanded the market. They started providing credit to segments which the bank was not able to access, and so on and so forth. We saw the MFI segment. We saw growth of consumer finance in certain, different types of markets, and so on and so forth. Yes, something similar in the tech space.
Sure. So we are coming to ICICI Securities. You guys have acquired a lot of customers since COVID, and most broking houses have like yours, or at least top 5 have acquired. Now I'm assuming that the revenue per customer right now of these new guys would be reasonably low, because you are, from what I understand of demographics, is much, younger age, but tech savvy guys, but also in small towns, right? So am I right in that assumption?
Yeah. So, this is a question that all the analysts have been asking us. We have been telling that please be a little patient, because we ourselves are, I would say, babies in this whole journey of acquiring these customers at this pace, and in particularly of this kind of a segment. We need some amount of runway of time before we can start publishing or giving out that data. What we have been sharing is that indeed, at least based on the preliminary sort of experience of acquiring these customers, certainly I think two things are coming out very clearly. A very large proportion of them, I would say that the number is close to 50% of them are young. When I say young, below 25. So 18 to 25 is 50% of our acquisition for last quarter, for instance. I would believe that this number is not going to be very different in the industry. Give or take a few percentage points here and there, but that would largely be representative of industry. The second characteristic which is coming out from this kind of an acquisition is that a very large proportion is coming from the non-large cities, or non-tier 1, tier 2 cities. So more tier 3, tier 4 cities is what I would say. And that number for us was last quarter was little over 80%, I think 83 or 84%. It was similar for some of the other players, maybe slightly more actually for some of the other players. So if you're saying 85-15 broadly for the industry, you have the tier 3, tier 4 town customers and 25 years. So when the moment you juxtapose these two characteristics with what you asked me in terms of revenue capability, automatically you would gravitate to the answer very intuitively that it is likely to be a low value kind of a customer. So it is indeed playing out like that, a low value kind of a customer.
Right.
But what is to be kept in the back of the mind is we have had the experience of acquiring young customers for 20 years, because when we started off in the early 2000s, we started by acquiring salary relationships of ICICI Bank corporate customers. And typically the age profile of the then acquired customers would have been probably 24, 25, 26, in that kind of a ballpark. So they were also low on their economic capability back then. Over a period of time, we've seen stickiness of a very high order in this platform. Of course, the environment then was very different from the environment that we are faced with. Past experience has demonstrated that if you acquire young and you manage a good stickiness and good experience for customers, you have a lifetime monetization capability. That's a proven empirical sort of an experience for the last several years. Even today, a 5-year-old customer acquired continues to remain a very active, vibrant customer. So if you're able to get him over the hill, meaning you get him over the hill by making him an active customer, and you're able to get, let's say, 1.5 or 2 years of value in him. That's the kind of a so-called honeymoon period when there is fickleness of continuing, not continuing with you. But if you get him across that barrier of 1.5 to 2 years, the chances are that he will stick with you for life. And equities is one business where you start when you're sort of young and you just keep adding to it, as you go through your age. So the expectation and the hope all of us in the industry have got is acquire them young, try and do a good job of serving them well, and then grow, that relationship over a lifetime value and monetize. Because operating cost of running relationships in a do-it-yourself fintech model is very, very low, as you would.
Yeah. So, in fact, you've partly answered my next question, which was in terms of how. So, as you said, now it's the question of mining these customers and trying to get a bigger wallet share of these guys, right? So, that's one thing that you want to do. What, as you also said, you alluded that it was very different earlier. Now, probably, the attention deficiency is much lower of most people. So they kind of.
The options are much more.
Yeah.
In fact, the options were not as many.
That's right. So what are you doing basically as a strategy to mine these customers and keep them sticky?
It's a great question, and it's a question that we ask ourselves every day. In fact, just before joining you for this call, we were having a very heated discussion within the company as to what we should be doing to get this engagement better and so on and so forth. Very involved decisions, what I should say, not heated. So what are we trying to do? I think first and foremost, in the past, I would say we were largely a single product company, which is equities. Today, we are looking at it more in a holistic manner. Okay? So it's not just about equities, it's about the entire gamut of financial services. So spanning three sort of sectors, the savings piece. So there is a whole range of propositions that we are offering in the savings side, starting from basic savings products, going right up to mutual funds, fixed income, different types of corporate bonds, deposits, gold bonds, sovereign bonds, mutual funds, right through the entire range of, I would say, structured products as you become wealthier. So that entire savings piece, so that's a much wider spectrum that we are catering to. The second is the protection services. So when I say protection, I mean insurance. So insurance propositions that we never used to offer in the past. I think there is a heightened effort to digitize and offer these solutions to him, which is largely around health, largely around assets, and of course, around retirement and protection of life. And finally, we are also expanded our horizons to offer different types of loans, credit cards, and so on and so forth. So the proposition is now much wider compared to the past. So that's one difference. The second, I would say, piece that we are trying very hard is, in the past, you could only service a small segment of customers through what one would call a relationship branch model kind of a thing, which was the way servicing used to happen in the past. This customer, because of, I would say, digitization, which is emerged in such a massive scale, because of, I would say, advancements in data sciences that have happened over a period of time, the progress that has happened in analytical thinking, developments that have happened in machine learning, artificial intelligence, it is possible to evolve, I would say, servicing models, which are far more personalized using tech, so that you're able to offer services at scale. The articulation of this concept is the easiest thing to do. Execution of this concept is the toughest thing to do. So if you ask me, that is the other thing that we are trying to get the model, I would say, first in place, and then get it right and get it at scale. I think people who will be able to create a very intelligent kind of engagement at scale and provide that kind of a service and have a gamut of products to offer has got a good chance of winning in the future. If you don't do, I think to expect the past trends to continue, to come in the future, that I think it would not be appropriate. We really think we are dealing with a different set of customers. They may be the similar age profile as the past when we acquired them, but I think the behavior is it's a different generation altogether. The behavior is going to be different.
Sure. Vijay, I can go on and on, but there are 3 minutes left. So I'll ask you one last question. So if I look at growth, so today by nature of the business, you are a very high ROE business. You have like 60+% ROE. But if I look at, let's say, your growth aspirations, new product areas that you're adding, maybe tech, capex or opex, whatever required, do you think that going forward, this ROEs can potentially come down, or you think that you'll continue to do this, you can fund your business through opex rather than capex?
Yeah, so there is a very, I would say, unique nature of our business model. It's a business model where our what I call inventory equal to zero. It's a business model where receivable is equal to zero. I mean, virtually, we first collect the money, then render service. It's a business model where there is no WIP and finished goods. So to that extent, it's a very low and light capital consuming business. So that's the nature of the business. It is a business which is highly digital, and the changes that have happened in consumer behavior thanks to the pandemic or following the pandemic has sort of provided an impetus to demand actually for our services and products. So from that point of view, I think the business, I would say, parameters are very well positioned for it to remain a low capital consuming kind of a entity. Where the investments are required largely in tech. That's the place, or for that matter, if there's an M&A that one wants to do for growth. These are the only 2 places where really capital is required. We, in our scheme of things, have found that technology is not a very high cost item in India. And it is something that, articulated by me in the company, that there is absolutely no limit on technology. You please spend on technology to the extent that you can. And despite that, we find that, there is enough and more, I would say, surplus that gets left behind post, I would say, PAT. We have therefore come out with a policy which sort of indicates that, we will endeavor to give at least 50% of our post-tax profit back to our shareholders in form of dividends. So that's clearly an indication of the fact that we clearly are seeing, given our tech spends and capex requirements, self-sustaining kind of a business model. Point number 1. Point number 2, we also have identified growth as an important area for us, and it is possible that some of our OPEX could be front loaded to in customer acquisition, which will lead to revenues later. So to some extent, it would not be unreasonable to expect some, I would say, separation of ROEs, but by and large, if I go by our guidance, I think ROE is not an area that will be a cause of concern. Capital and ROE is not an area that one should really feel very sort of concerned about for our growth ambitions as well as the business.
Sure, Vijay. Thanks a lot for doing this. As I said, I can go on and on, but we have run out of time. I think one thing I must say that you are one of the few bank-backed brokers who's like getting the best of both worlds. You've created a fintech organization and have all the positives of a bank. And wishing you all the very best for long term. I think I'm really excited with your business.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for having me on your chat show. I want to thank all the audience for patiently listening to this interview. And in case there are any follow-ups and any questions that your clients want to have, please feel free. We'll be happy to deal with them either one-on-one or session.
Sure. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too.